you see. Yeah. And the war had started just prior to me leaving school, so my schooling was disrupted like all the other kids. They're all evacuated and so on. And 1942, I was thinking after I said 42, it was 42 when I left school. And of course, jobs were 10 a penny. You know, you could go anywhere for a job. And of course, I wanted to go with my mates into different factories. But my father said, no, you've got to come into the ICI with me and take up a trade. It's been no reason to me. I wanted to be an engineer. And I asked my dad, could I be a fitter and turner or something? After that, I don't know why. It's just something that must have been in my blood, I think. Anyway, I mustn't have been clever enough for that because, first of all, I started at 14 as a messenger boy, working from the head office in Widnes, going to the various factories with the mail. It's a very interesting job, really, but you're always on the go all the time. You never stopped. But when my 16th birthday came along, they said to me, we've looked at your records and your night school reports and one thing and another, and we can only offer you two trades, plumbing or bricklaying. So, of course, I was a bit dismayed because I wanted to be an engineer. And I said to my dad, if I could be a fitter, a turner or an electrician, I'd be happy, but plumber and bricklayer, like, it's not what I imagined, you see. So my dad said, well, you know, you've got to count it as a privilege to get one. So I took the bricklaying. And immediately they sent me over the water to Runcorn to what we know in the factory as the Kemet. More well-known, I suppose, really, as Wigg East and Wigg West, but that's the name we used, the Kemet. And I was there for about 12 months. I got to know the place pretty well. It was a reasonably clean place. Lots of interesting things to see, all sorts of wonderful furnaces and different processes and plants. And
what were they actually making?
Well, the main ingredient there, I suppose, really would be sulphuric acid. And then they made hydrochloric acid, and they made a product known as water white sulphuric acid, which was, like as we know today, but they were the first in the world. First high quality sulphuric acid. They made gelatine, salt cake. At one time there'd been a red lead plant there, but that was disused at the moment. There was other plants there, I forget the names now, of the different products. The gelatine was an interesting process. After about 12 happy months there, relatively happy months anyway, they said to me, you've got to go to Muspratts. Of course, when I went to Muspratts, this was an old remnant of the old LeBlanc soda making process. And of course, when I went through Muspratts Gate, I was in for a rude shock because the Kemet, by comparison, was heaven. You know, but this place was absolutely, can't describe it. You know, it was a shock to think, like, you know, you go into those big black doors into that cavernous place, you know, and the dirt, the grime. Oh, it was absolutely terrible. I hated it, you know. And yet it was interesting, nevertheless. I mean, the interest was the only sort of thing that, the interesting process was the only sort of thing that took the ache away, like I wanted to get out of the place. And
was there a smell or dust or what?
Well, everything was done on the old-fashioned system, you see. Everything was hand-done. The shunts, there was railway lines everywhere. Every shed had its railway system, you see. The wagons would come in, they'd offload slack over the side with shovels, salt cake, various things. There'd be clouds of dust blowing about everywhere. Everything got a thick coat in a mixture of coal dust and salt cake, so that, for instance, if you were to look on the top of, say, a pipe or a wall, there'd be about 4 or 5 or 6 inches deep of this stuff on top. And if you disturbed it, of course, there'd be a great cloud of it. So you can imagine that no matter what you did, you were disturbing the stuff all the time. And it was in the air, it was on your tongue. You know, you needed a bath about 3 times a day. And you used to come home feeling, you know, filthy. Some of the jobs, I was describing to your friends, some of the jobs that we had to do as bricklayers were unbelievable. A very interesting thing, which I didn't mention to you last time, was the way they lined the revolvers. That is something that a lot of people will sort of marvel at today. We had this big cylindrical drum, about, I'm only guessing, about 25, 27, maybe 30 feet long, and about 10 or 12 feet diameter. And we had to line it all the way around, and the ends with fire bricks. These things lasted about, I think it was about 3 weeks cycle. We had 2 of these furnaces. The actual brick lining would last about 6 weeks, so every 3 weeks we had one or the other furnaces to do. But to do the actual brick lining was you know, it was weird the way it was done. And the funny thing there, which I didn't mention to you the last time, was the fact that we used to grind all the fire clay. It was put in a mill and ground into a very fine consistency. And the idea was that when you line the furnace, you knock the bricks up with a hammer rather than a mallet. I mean, most refractory engineers use a rubber mallet, you see, so as not to damage the bricks. But we had to give them a hefty whack with a 4-pound lump hammer to make sure that it was almost brick-to-brick contact. Well, of course, the fire clay used to spray out all over you. And when you came out the furnace after an hour or two's work, you were completely covered in this fire clay. Oh, it was terrible.
Now, if you're putting these bricks inside a furnace which is going to revolve, presumably you can only go so far, and then you've got to actually revolve the furnace, have you? Or how do you do it?
Yeah, well, this is the point, you see. The furnace, you started at the bottom, and you worked about 3 foot up one side, then you went back to the bottom and worked 3 foot up the other side to keep it balanced, then you went up about another 3 foot, then on the opposite side another 3 foot. So eventually you came to about the 10 o'clock, 2 o'clock position in the furnace, roughly. And then we had to span from one wall of the furnace to the other with these huge timber joists, which rested on wooden plates, both on the brickwork and on the drum, and then they were hammered up tight with wooden wedges. It sounds easy to say, but it's hard to imagine. But then the whole thing was reversed, so that the top was now at the bottom, you see. So when you went back into the furnace next time, you had about, say, 6 feet each side to do from the bottom. And then you used to make up and join your new brickwork to the other brickwork between the joists. And we used to hammer the keys in with what we used to call them pummers. It was like a piece of timber, say 4 or 5 foot long, say 6 inches by 4, something like that. We used to bang these bricks in really, really tight so they used to ring. And then they would remove when they were in position, all of them, then they would remove the wedges and the blocks and these cross timbers. So you were left with a series of holes which could then be made up. As I say, it sounds easy to say, but you've got to see it to believe it, you know. And all the while you had this few 100-ton of brickwork suspended over your head, like, you know, which is used to worry you at times in case anything went wrong. In fact, once something did go wrong, not that there was any danger to anybody, but what happened was, when they finished relining the furnace, they were in such a rush to get back into production that instead of giving the lining, I think it's about 48 hours normally, on a slow fire, they immediately tried to hurry the process up by giving it, say 12 hours of a slow fire. And then they went into production with the result that the lining moved inside the barrel. And it was like quite a commotion that was to get that sorted out. The end walls came in, the emptying holes were now completely blocked. So they had to get, I don't know if they got the charge out. When me, you know, it's...
How did they discharge?
Oh, well, to discharge the furnace, when the charge went in, of course, it was dry stuff. It was coal slack and salt cake and various other ingredients. I don't know what, because I wasn't interested in the process side of it, only in the maintenance side. But then they start the furnace up, and to increase the heat, at certain stages of the process was necessary. They used to squirt water underneath the fire bars on the firebox, which would increase the temperature because it was hydrogen going in, you see. And then when the mix got to a certain level and was ready to be discharged, there'd be all sorts of tic-tac signals going ahead, and they'd then remove 2 of the 4 doors, circular apertures, about 18 inches diameter, something like that. They would remove the doors and get all the bogies lined up underneath, the little metal skips, then revolve the furnace fairly fast, and the stuff used to come spewing out like imagine a volcanic eruption, but it's almost the same thing, you know. It's molten lava-like stuff used to pour out into these bogies, and the bogies would be dragged through by a steam winch. Everything was operated by steam in there. These furnaces were operated by steam, big twin-cylinder steam engines with gearboxes, which is very unusual for a steam engine. They usually drive directly, but these had gears. This was in order to be able to control the revolutions and so on as exactly as they wanted. Very interesting. Like I explained to your friend, though, there was all sorts of dark places where you could hide. You see, like I explained to your friend, we had to carry a considerable number of bricklayers because everything was sort of orientated round brickwork, and we were needed at times rather urgently. So when you weren't needed, you had to sort of discreetly hide yourself so as not to be too conspicuous, you know. They'd try and find you little jobs, but you knew and they knew that half the time it was just somewhere to book your time, that you had to be very discreet like and not to be seen, you know, until you were needed. And then when you were needed, it was every hand to the pumps and work day and night and get the job done.
How did they tell you when you were needed? How did they inform you?
Well, the foreman would come round, or the charge hand would come round, say, "Come on, lads, get a move on, pack your tools up. You've got to do this, you've got to do that." And then we knew what was happening. We used to sometimes stand and watch the revolver, and you could see dull red patches showing on the shell, and you knew that the fire lining was getting very thin in that particular place. You see, it might wear down to say 2 or 3 inches thick, and the casing would show dull red. Well, of course, they wouldn't work the furnace until it damaged the shell. Then you would know that within the next, say, 12 hours, the furnace would be stopped and the old lining would be stripped out, and we would be in within 24 hours. We'd be in relining it.
And how warm would it be when you went in?
Oh, quite cold, because the first job to do was to drop the fire. The firebox must have held, and I'm only guessing now, I bet the firebox held about 20 tonnes of fuel. It was a huge firebox. It would be about 12 feet square, and the fuel depth would be 3 or 4 feet in it. You can imagine that. Imagine the fire bars underneath. They were great railway metals, and blocks of iron, steel rather, about say 4 inches square, and they had a key that as the fire bars sagged under the combined weight and the heat, they would turn the keys round. They'd turn the bars round with a certain key. And one day, I watched 2 or 3 men with a poker. Imagine 2 or 3 men on one poker. The poker would be about 12 foot long, about 3 inches by inch and a half, slab of metal to poke the furnace with. You can imagine that. 3 men on it, you know, simultaneously. You couldn't even pick it up yourself, you know. Very interesting. But it was primeval. It's...
You said about the safety clearance, the sacking.
Oh, yeah, well, of course, you'd have to understand the process. There were 2 of these furnaces, and when they discharged this cake into these skips, the skips were allowed to cool, and these men would come along, and to see them, you wouldn't believe, you'd think it was something out of Middle Ages. They were dressed up in old sacks. In fact, they kept a man in a little cabin to make sacks. He was a disabled chap. He had a one leg, I think, and his job was to make these suits out of sacks. It was weird. They used to dress up in these sacks, and they'd have layers and layers and layers of stuff we used to call mutton cloth, muslin, if you like, wrapped round the faces or over the mouths, goggles on, hats on, gloves on, clogs, and they were like zombies, you know. Funny way to describe them. They'd frighten you if you didn't. A little child would be terrified. And this gang of men had tipped these, they'd run across the ball bank, which is an iron floor, tipped these skips up against a rail all the way around to free the cakes. And then they belaboured the cakes with these big, heavy sledgehammers and mallets and hooks and rakes and things. And when they'd broken up, say, I don't know what weight was it, maybe a couple of tons of the stuff, then they'd drag along this huge metal bogey on iron wheels on an iron floor, you can imagine it, shovel the stuff up, and this was a high bogey, it must have been 7 or 8 feet high. They would shovel the stuff into it till it was full, and they'd all get the shoulders around it and trundle it across the floor to a hoist where it was elevated to a miniature railway track on the top, where this miniature railway track went over various what we called extractors. They were like a metal drum, I don't know, maybe 12 feet diameter, 12 feet deep, something like that, with little trapdoors on the top. And all this ore stuff was discharged into the extractor, and then the lids were sealed with field clay, which was ground, and then they turned on the steam, and this was steamed all night. And then down below there was a little outlet gate, and a chap had come along periodically with a little sort of a probing thing and cleared it and keep the stuff trickling out. And it used to trickle out into cast iron troughs. And from the troughs, sometimes it would go to pots underneath, but sometimes it would go directly across the firing way into the actual concentrating furnaces. Like there were big open pots where the stuff was boiled and concentrated. They were just open, like drain pipes, like gutters, like huge gutters. And the liquor used to run across, and if you happened to be walking underneath and anything went wrong and it blocked and you got an overflow, well, it was every man for himself. You had to make sure, you know, you had to have your eyes
Were accidents common?
Oh, reasonably common, yeah. There were several accidents there. One chap was firing these concentrating pots when one of this thing blocked and overflowed onto him. It completely covered his back with this boiling stuff, and they let it strip into the bone within a few minutes. His ribs showing. I was in the army when that happened.
That was a fatality.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether they survived or not, but I would imagine it'd be a fatality. And another fatality happened in another plant. There were two plants there. There was this old one I'm describing now, but there was a modern plant in there where they made carbon bisulfide, and these, because of the nature of the job, they used to force these pots. These pots had a safety pressure relief bell, and they used to deliberately dust that with sulphur to make it cake, so that they could force the furnace, you see. This was during the war, of course, and just after the war when production was all vital. But the result that the actual pot used to become over-pressurised. And occasionally, and it happened to me once, I was in the next pot repairing what happened, these iron pots where they concentrated the stuff, where they used to force them, and they used to get a scale on the outside of the pot. But you see, we're getting away from the other plant, we're in the new plant now. But anyway, the outcome of it...
Yes.
Pardon?
Tell the tale. Yeah.
The outcome of it was that this chap was driving the crane when one of these pots blew its lid, and of course the molten sulphur hit the roof and all the gases went up with it, and he died. And all he had to get to one end or the other of the house to get down the ladder, or jump out with a huge umbrella. I can imagine that. It's not a leg pull. He had an umbrella up there, like a huge parasol. And in an emergency, he was expected to push this parasol up and jump maybe 60 feet, 70 feet perhaps, to the metal floor down below. Well, I don't blame him for not jumping, but the result was that he didn't get out, and he got gassed and he died. And a fellow named Peter Yasites, who, to my knowledge, never got recognised for what he did. So Peter Yasites got a mutton cloth, as we called it, dipped it in water, wrapped it round his face, went up the ladder 60 feet, along the catwalk, dragged him out the furnace. Now, to get into the furnace, you've got to walk past these electrified buzz bars, which is dangerous, it's terribly dangerous, 450 volts. Dragged the man along the thing to the roof and smashed a hole through one of the glass panes in the roof and dragged him out onto the guttering outside. I believe he was dead. Now, as far as I know, Peter Yasites never got... he should have had a UN medal or something for that, and as far as I know, he never got anything. Never even got a mention. And that chap died. I do know, I was there when that happened.
Well, this umbrella intrigues me. Who supplied that?
It was part of the kit, for the
firm supplied.
Oh yeah.
What diameter would it be?
I've never seen it erected, It's just like a giant umbrella. I mean, we never went in the...
It was a fishing umbrella?
I would imagine it'd be a lot bigger, I would imagine, yeah. And I never actually saw it, but, the reference was there. He could have used it in an emergency. It would have slowed him down. But would you fancy jumping 60 feet with an umbrella? Because I wouldn't.
That's incredible.
One day, I was there, I remember this particularly well. This particular plant, this is rather naughty, like what they did. They were discharging this stuff into Bowers Brook, which ran underneath the factory. It was a kind of it was there as an emergency overflow, you see. And of course we'd had a drought, and with no water going down Bowers Brook, this highly volatile stuff started to vaporise in the drains. And it was one noon, about 1 o'clock, and I stood by the Time Office gate. And I think it was during the war, yeah, because I remember thinking it was German bombs. There was this huge woof, and then one a bit nearer, woof, and another one about 100 yards away. And by this time, your heart's in your throat. And then, to be amazement, about 30, 40 feet away, the ground erupted, and it was a manhole, a huge heavyweight manhole, on the cover, which must have weighed a ton at least, because it was between the railway sets. This cover flew about 30 feet into the air, going over and over and over, and came down and dropped into the wagon alongside it, and the poor wagon went down on its knees with the weight, with the shock, and it was the drains exploding. There was a backlash in the drains, yeah. Very naughty, wasn't it, Could have killed somebody, of course. Yeah. What is it, you see, the ICI, I mean, be fair, like, they'd taken this place over. I suppose the ICI had done the best, because they'd erected new sheds, like I explained to you. They'd erected new sheds, although they'd left some of the original sheds in there. They tried to improve it, but I mean, I suppose they knew it was a lost cause. How could it improve a place that was medieval? The only thing was to let it run until it was no longer a viable thing, and then shut it all down, which is exactly what they did. And it's a good thing they shut it down.
You said it was very labour intensive.
Oh yeah.
Everything done by...
Everything. There was no modern machinery whatever in the place. Everything was done by hand, and I mean everything. You go to the stores, and these bottles of hydrogen and stuff like that, and acetylene and so on. Everything was manhandled. There was just no other way of doing it in there anyway. I mean, these huge pots, which had to be rotated every so often, the concentrating pots, they must have weighed 20, 30 tons. They had to be jacked up and slewed round by hand, everything. If they'd taken one out and put another one in, it was all done by hand. There was no... I've never seen a stacker truck in there, or a lorry, or anything of that description. All they had was shunting engines and wagons, and everything else. I remember the great day, and this was after the war, when we got a two-wheel wheelbarrow. Honestly, it's not a joke. We called it the dobbin, and we got this two-wheel dobbin, and we thought we were the bee's knees because we had a two-wheel wheelbarrow. And I remember one time, about 20 of us getting down a huge pile of gravel and sand and mixing it by hand, concrete, because we hadn't got a concrete mixer. That seems unbelievable that the ICI didn't have a concrete mixer, but when I say that, it's not quite true. They did have one, but it was in use in another factory, you see. And so, if you had a job in the meantime, that concrete mixer was moved from works to works, you just got to and mixed it with shovels. Simple as that.
Where did you eat when you had a break?
Well, there was a canteen there, but it was a very small canteen, and not very many people used it. We always took sandwiches, and we sat in the mortar mill. We had no official residence at all. Our home at that time was in the mortar mill. That's the foreman knew where we'd be, where he could find us. We used to just sit on planks of wood with bricks and just eat our butties, underneath the mill sort of thing. We had nowhere to put our gear. If you got to work wet through, you'd take your wet gear off and hang it up in the mortar mill till 5 o'clock and, put it on and go home. There was just no facilities at all then.
What was that about, like flea bites? What was that?
Oh yeah, this is what used to make the place absolutely revolting was that when the liquor was run into these concentrating ponds and the fires were lit underneath, the stuff would boil and boil and boil. Well, very often we'd be working on, say, the next pot. Or you might be working 50 yards away, but very often we'd be working on the next pot. And the vapour that used to come off had bits of this chemical stuff in it, you see. And it'd get on the backs of your hands or on your face. And we used to just grin and laugh and say, it's biting today. And they were just like flea bites. Real prickly bites all over you all the time. And your hands used to get in a bit of a mess with it, It was horrible. And if the stuff got in your eyes, I explained to you about a chap losing his eyesight, didn't I? I think you were interested in the bloke emptying the extractors too, weren't you? I explained that. I wouldn't have liked his job. When the stuff had been boiled all night with the steam, they'd come the next morning, and this chap would take the lid off, and he'd pull a chain, which released a plug hole, if you like, at the bottom, and all this gluey stuff would slurge out and slop into a tanker underneath. But it still left a residue, say 4 or 5 foot deep up the sides, and he would then strip off to the waist and go down with just a pair of wellies and pants on, and a big boiler shovel, and scrape it all out and slurp it all out through the hole in the floor. Imagine him falling through the hole in the floor and going into that tank underneath. I mean, this stuff was caustic. It was dangerous stuff, I tell you about the old Jack Lawless, didn't I? We used to go and work at 7:30 in the morning. This chap had started at 6, and he used to empty a 13.5-ton wagon of slack on his own with a boiler shovel every morning. As we went in at 7:30, he'd emptied a 13.5-ton wagon of slack on his own. Now, there was nowhere for this slack to go. This was the humorous thing. The slack just went out of the wagon, so that the wagon finished up half embedded in the wagon, and there'd be a whole row of these wagons. So at the end of the day, he'd gone all along this row of wagons, and the wagons were all sort of 3-4 foot deep in slack. And then I'd come in the shunter, hook up to the end wagon, and just drag them bodily out of the shed through the slack, because there's nowhere for the slacks to go. It just lay 4 foot deep on the railway track. And then the chaps who fired these concentrating pots, they were usually up to the knees in water because of the canal was alongside the factory, and at certain states of the tide the whole factory used to flood. For instance, you couldn't go under the boilers at certain states of the tide because the boilers used to flood. You had to shut the fires down because the boilers wouldn't pull because of 3 foot of water in the flues and so on. And
you're kidding.
It's gospel truth. I know it's unbelievable. I mean, it was unbelievable then. That was during the war. I mean, imagine 40 odd years later. Like it's just unbelievable. But it was unbelievable then. But it happened. You know.
During the war, were there air raid precautions? What happened if there was an air raid?
Oh yeah, there were blast walls built everywhere, all the office windows and places, and there was blackout things in front of these furnaces that fired the furnaces. There were huge timber structures put up to take the glare so they didn't get outside. There was all sorts of, dim outs and blackouts, and you couldn't. I don't suppose you could completely black the place out. Not the nature of it. I mean, imagine emptying those furnaces. I mean. I don't know, how could it? There was glass in the roofs. Bear in mind, the glass in the roofs was that filthy, there's no light to get through, I don't suppose, anyway, Yeah.
Were women working there during the war?
Yes, so are there a lot of women working there during the war, yeah. Driving cranes, all sorts of jobs. Like I say, everything was done by hand, The tradesmen had women assistants, labourers. Even at Kemet, I had a woman labourer working with me during the war. I was only a lad, but they give you a woman labour because labour was so cheap, you see. In fact, they brought a lot of the old pensioners back, and I had a chap working with me, and it really shook me rigid when he told me that he'd been shipwrecked 3 times. His name was Jimmy Davis. He was about 80 years of age then. A Runconian. This was at Runcorn, old Runcorn Works. And one day in conversation, we got on about shipwrecks, and he told me rather, matter of factly, that, he'd been shipwrecked when he was a lad 3 times off the coast of Ireland, taking coal or salt or something, I don't know if it was coal or salt, from Runcorn to Ireland on a sailing ship, and he'd been shipwrecked 3 times. And because of the war and the need for labour, they brought him back in the factory. He's a real old character, was Jimmy.
How did the women cope with the muck and the grime?
Nobody seemed to notice, to tell you the truth.
I mean, how were they dressed?
Oh, they used to wear overall suits, trousers and a jacket and a blue bob thing that took the hair in, They seemed to cope well enough. I mean, they were mostly middle-aged women. You didn't see many, there were no dolly birds or anything like that them days anyway, But they seemed matter of fact. My own mother worked in Muspratt in the First World War, when it was a munitions place. They made munitions there in the First World War. Lyddite was made at Muspratt.
What was she doing?
Packing explosives. She's still alive, she's 89.
What was the one with the chap who went into the furnace?
Do you mean, that was me. You mean the muffle wall, you mean? Putting the muffle up?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, these revolving furnaces, the revolvers as they were known, had a boiler to use the waste heat. And it was a water tube boiler, and the tubes were inclined at an angle of about 45 degrees, I would imagine, something like that. And during every 6 weeks, we used to reline the furnace, the boiler tubes would be cleaned, which meant the removal of this dry block wall. Of course, when I say clean, that's only a relative word. I mean, they weren't clean. Don't misunderstand me, Instead of having, say, 6 inches of muck on the tubes, they might have half an inch, put it that way. But my job afterwards, and I got this job that regular, I thought somebody had it in for me, was to crawl in through a little tiny iron door, which was about 4 foot above ground level. So you had to sort of get some kind of scaffolding to even attempt to climb in it. When you got inside, this door would be about 15 inches by about 10, something like that. You found yourself between 2 banks of tubes, and there was an angle iron, piece of heavy angle iron running the full width of the furnace, which you had to stand on. It was about 4 inches wide. Now, your mate would hand you in a block. Now, between these tubes would be about 18 inches. So your mate would hand you in a block 18 inches by 12 by 3 inches thick, which you proceeded to drag across and place on the angle iron at the far side. And then you come back for the next one. And you repeat that until you had a course of blocks all the way full width of the furnace, which left you about an inch to stand on. And then it would give you some more blocks, but these were slightly thin. These would be about, say, 2.5 inches thick. And you used to build up to about 7 or 8 feet high a wall that just rested on the tubes. There was no mortar. It was simply to raise the flame over the tubes, to elevate the flame. Now, you can't imagine standing at 45 degrees in pitch darkness, dragging these blocks and sliding them up in front of your face like this, and the dust that used to come off the blocks and off the tubes was just indescribable. I mean, looking at it from my point of view now, I mean, there's no way I'd send a dog in there to do that job, but we had to do it. We thought nothing, we didn't like it, of course, but we didn't. Everybody had to do it. A worse job than that was under the boilers. I think I told you about that, going under the boilers, didn't I? You had to remove plates in the floor and go into a trench which was full of obstructions, pipes and valves and things like that. And at the bottom of the trench was a little iron door again, which would only be about, say, 12 by 15 at the most. You take the door off, and then you sort of get yourself into position to get an arm through, and then your head, and then you put your feet on the opposite side of the trench and push yourself in. You always made a popping noise as you went through. Then you found yourself under the shell of the furnace. Your mate would then hand you a lead, a light. Looking at it from my point of view now, I mean, there's no way I'd send a dog in there to do that job, but we had to do it. We thought nothing, we didn't like it, of course, but we didn't. Everybody had to do it. A worse job than that was under the boilers. I think I told you about that, going under the boilers, didn't I? You had to remove plates in the floor and go into a trench which was full of obstructions, pipes and valves and things like that. And at the bottom of the trench was a little iron door again, which would only be about, say, 12 by 15 at the most. You take the door off, and then you sort of get yourself into position to get an arm through, and then your head, and then you put your feet on the opposite side of the trench and push yourself in. You always made a popping noise as you went through. Then you found yourself under the shell of the furnace. Your mate would then hand you a lead, a light on the end of a wire. You could drag it in, and you couldn't stand up. You would double up all the time, because the highest point would be about 3 foot 6 perhaps. And then we used to go under these furnaces and the boilers and do various jobs, repairing and moving blocks, so the factory inspector could inspect the joints and so on, all kinds of things. But once you were in, you were in. It was so hard to get in or out that rather than go through all the agony of trying to get in and out, you should stay in there all day. And they'd send you your butties and your cups of tea and so on, you see. And my neighbour shouting, "Oh, I seem to take notice." And one day I was in there, and there was, if you finish a job in there, we didn't always remove, we're supposed to remove everything, you see, but so much of a hassle. If you had a few bricks left over or what, you just left them in there rather than go through all the hassle of getting them in and out, which wasn't quite right. And one day I was sat on this little 2 or 3 bricks, where a little platform bed myself, and my mate came to the door and shouted, "Cup of tea, Eric," and a little paper bag with a round of toasted bread. So I sat there eating my toast and drinking my tea, and the light of this little feeble glimmer of the lamp, and I was looking down towards the far end of the boiler, and these economiser tubes were at the far end, and very often these economisers used to leak, and you get little rain drops of water running down and trickling, you see. And I sort of sat there bored to tears and watching these little drops of water run up and down and sideways, and suddenly it occurred to me that these little drops of water were always in twos. I thought, that's strange, you know. And I'd seen some drops of water going upwards. I thought, water doesn't go upwards. When I went to investigate, it was a nest of rats. Well, I'm not pulling your leg, I was terrified. I know better now, but when you corner a rat, it goes for your throat. This was the old saying. We know it's nonsense, like, but at that time I believed it, you know. That they went for your throat. And there was a nest of rats in there. How the heck they got it? They must have had a way in and out, because the place would be red hot 99% of the time, and flooded for the other 10%, you know. I mean, how the rats, what the heck they saw in there, I don't know. But I was there with those rats, and my blood went to water. But never mind, we got over it. That's just one. There was lots of things like that, you know, unbelievable things about Musprats.
Anything else? Shall we leave it there then?
Yeah.
Okay. Unless there's something you particularly want to tell us that we've missed.
Well, overall, you know, what you're at is to try and get the atmosphere of the place. And the atmosphere of the place was that it was just primeval. it was so backward, so dirty, so inefficient, you know, that you'd wonder that. I know the ICI were lumbered with this. It was a legacy of what they'd taken over. They were lumbered with it, you know, and I know now they wouldn't entertain it for a minute like today, but they were lumbered with it. The war was on and so on, you know. The best place that happened, it was if Hitler could have flattened it, you know, and saved them the trouble. But then again, having said that, it made a lot of money for the ICI because the product was, they couldn't make enough, you know.
You mentioned that you worked at a place where they did sulfuric acid when on your first jobs. Do you remember?
Yeah.
How did they make that? Do you know? I know you weren't particularly involved with it.
Yeah, well, we're involved to the point that we had to build the furnaces where they burnt the sulphur. There were several furnaces there. There was these huge old-fashioned things called Humboldts and Herreshoffs, and they burned pyrite ore. But then they were modified to burn sulphur because there was a great shortage of sulphur at one time. And then they brought in the pure sulphur burner, which was a much smaller machine that burned pure crystal sulphur. And that's an interesting thing because the gases from these burners were led off to these towers where they were put through like scrubbers to remove the dust and impurities and so on, you know. And part of our job in the process was when they were shutting off and going from one tower to another, we had to enter these flues and build up a brick wall inside the flue. Well, of course, it was absolutely red hot in there. I used to wear clogs and a big thick woolly suit and a gas mask on. They used to pump air in from the outside to you. And my great mistake was you'd only stand it for about 5 minutes. The heat was so great that there's 3 or 4 bricklayers all waiting turn, you see. And I dashed in, and I think you'd put 2 courses of brickwork on, do it as quick as you could and get out. And of course, as soon as I got outside and staggered out into the fresh air, the daftest thing that I did was remove my gas mask. Now that's the daftest thing you could do, because immediately you remove your gas mask, all the vapours and fumes that were entangled into the suit were then all around your face and you're inhaling the pure gas. What you should have done was remove your clothing, you see, and then remove your gas mask. That was a lesson to me after near passing out with the fumes. I know one place, I think it was the Muspratt, used to make, I think it was 1,000 tonnes of sulfuric acid a day. Unbelievable amounts. Railway wagons, you know, trainloads of stuff used to go out every day. Unbelievable the quantity they could make and shift, and everybody wanted it. Everybody was crying out for sulfuric acid.
But deadly stuff to handle in the factory, presumably.
You didn't see much of it, believe it or not. You didn't see. The only time you saw sulfuric acid was when something went wrong, or unless you went looking for it. If you go poking around among these big vats and take lids off and peep in, then you'd see it. You used to see various places where the chaps were filling it, but it was all done rather. I mean, when I was there, there wasn't much of a hazard there really then. The only thing was that frequently, well, not frequently, that's the wrong word, but occasionally, these carboys would break if they were handled a wee bit roughly. Some of them used to have cracks in that would go unnoticed, and if you handle them roughly, then the carboy would break. Because a lot of stuff went out by carboy as well. A carboy broke on my brother, and he got a splash on his face with acid. Down at Nottingham, he was in hospital for a while. I don't know what kind of acid it was. I think it was formic acid, I think. He got splashed